Okay, we've got one heck of a show today. First off, we're going to talk about faith being under fire in America. White, rural Christians are next on the chopping block. I'm going to show you some MSNBC content. I'm going to show you Rob Reiner and his new video that's coming out, which if you've ever listened to Rob Reiner on X, he's probably one of the most toxic people on that platform. But nonetheless, white rural Christians, we're next up on the chopping block. We will be on an extremist list in the next 12 to 24 months. We're going to talk about a journalist who was shackled for misdemeanors. He was shackled and paraded in front of a judge for misdemeanors simply for having the wrong opinion. And then we're going to talk about a Section 230 case in the Supreme Court, which is huge in my opinion, but it's not getting a lot of play. And it's only a piece of the larger puzzle, but it's one of the things that's going to set some precedent, that's going to shape public discourse in the future. I think it's huge. We're going to listen to Clarence Thomas. We're going to listen to the lawyer making the argument. It's fascinating stuff. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Thank you for being here. Let's go ahead and get into it. I'm Jared, and this is Continue Freedom. Welcome back to Continue Freedom. If this is your first time here, welcome aboard. Be sure to like, subscribe, leave comments below. We're on X, Locals, Rumble, and YouTube. You can also go to ContinueFreedom.com, sign up for my mailing list, because it is fitting that today I'm talking about Section 230, one case, Moody versus NetChoice, which I know you haven't heard of. Nobody's heard of it. I'd never heard of it until I started reading about it. But I'm collecting email addresses because I've already been throttled once. My content is being throttled as we speak. And it was because of some of the things that were being discussed in this Supreme Court case. So sign up for my mailing list. That way, when I'm canceled, whenever that day comes, and I can reach out to you in the future and you can continue to hear my lovely voice. You can continue to hear from me if you go to ContinueFreedom.com and sign up for my mailing list. Okay, so Moody versus NetChoice. What in the heck is Moody versus NetChoice? Well, let's talk about it. The state of Florida enacted SB 7072 to address what it perceives as bias and censorship by large social media platforms against conservative voices. Do we believe that conservative voices are being throttled on social media? Yes. And I don't think anybody on the right can deny that. The people on the left still do, despite all the evidence to the contrary. But we as conservatives know we're being throttled, and Florida created a state law that would at least restrict it and put some parameters on that inside of their state. And the legislation imposes various restrictions and obligations on social media platforms, such as prohibiting the deplatforming of political candidates. Look no further than President Donald Trump. Even in the midst of January 6th, they were shutting him down so that he couldn't reach out to his people. And requiring detailed disclosures about content moderation policies. I had a run-in with the Tube about content moderation, and it was something that I said, and I won't say the word because I don't want to get throttled again, but it was a V word, and it was went into the deltoid of many people around the globe in the midst of a very serious public health thing that was going on at the time. And I hope that was vague enough to not have my video banned, but I said something negative about it. The problem is, at one point, the Tube said that, no, you can't talk about it. And then they said, yes, you can talk about it. So I talked about it. But while I was talking about it, in the midst of that, they had changed their terms of service to say, no, you can't talk about it anymore, but they didn't notify me. They didn't notify anybody. Therefore, they were able to take my video down, give me a strike, and it identified me as apparently as one of the scary, terrifying, conservative voices out here. And so ever since then, my content has been throttled and my reach has been limited. And it is obvious whenever that happens, by the way. They call it shadow banning, but if you're a small up and coming YouTube channel and you're watching your content constantly, it is painfully obvious that is actually happening. So this law, this SB 7072, is putting those restrictions on the social media companies, and it's meant to treat them like common carriers and focuses on those platforms that either have one, annual revenues exceeding 100 million or at least 100 million monthly individual participants. And this is a key, this ceiling that they've made for the size of the company is important, and we're going to talk about it in a second, why that is important and why those types of restrictions have to be put in place. But the enforcement mechanisms include substantial fines and the option for civil suits. So who is NetChoice? The 10-cent version of this is it's a trade association or it's actually NetChoice and the Computer and Communications Industry Association. They're trade associations that represent internet and social media companies like Facebook, Twitter, Google/YouTube, and TikTok. And they sued the Florida officials that are charged with enforcing SB 7072. And they say, first off, that it violates the social media company's right to free speech under the First Amendment, and two, that it's preempted by federal law. Now, we're going to listen to some of this, and I know, I get it. People don't want to listen to the legalese inside of the Supreme Court, and I'm probably doing myself a disservice by making us listen to this, but I'm only going to listen to a few snippets here and there. And it's important because the arguments being made are the same arguments that we're going to hear in the future, in future Supreme Court cases, depending on how this one ends up. But this is the nefarious nature and the mental gymnastics that they are trying to do with the First Amendment are very telling, and it tells us a lot about these companies and why they want to have their cake and eat it too when it comes to freedom from liability, but still censoring other people, censoring conservative voices. Let's listen to this.
Mr. Clement?
Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court, Florida's effort to level the playing field and to fight the perceived bias of big tech violates the First Amendment several times over. It interferes with editorial discretion, it compels speech, it discriminates on the basis of content, speaker, and viewpoint. And it does all this in the name of promoting free speech, but loses sight of the first principle of the First Amendment, which is it only applies to state action. Florida defends its law, as you've heard this morning, principally by insisting that there's no expressive activity being regulated. That blinks reality. This statute defines the targeted websites in part by how big their audience is.
Okay, a couple of things out of this. First off, editorial discretion. Social media companies want editorial discretion, but they want to have the protections of an open public forum. This is having their cake and eating it too. They say we should still have editorial discretion. The only editorial discretion that a public forum should have is against things or with things that violate the law. Let's use an example. Could you imagine a horrific scenario where cities around the country are being burned down and people are using social media to coordinate those riots? That's an instance where people should be shut down and people should be censored because there is a call to action. There's the coordination of action, and they are using social media to carry out things that are illegal. And the coordination of those things in and of themselves are illegal. Sure, you should be able to censor that. Outside of that, you don't have the same editorial discretion that the Wall Street Journal has, that the New York Times has, that any of these other editorial platforms actually do get and have to have, because they are open to lawsuits. If they publish something that is defamatory, they can be sued. Social media companies can allow people to publish things that are defamatory against, let's use a weird scenario where it's a political opponent, right? They're allowed to make up lies and say things that are, untrue or things that are defamatory against a political candidate, and they don't have to get sued for that. And in fact, they can alter how much of that is seen. So maybe we'll see one presidential candidate has all kinds of lies and nefarious stuff pushed about him, and another presidential candidate gets anything that is speaking out against him or her that gets throttled, right? So that you can kind of tip the scales. You see how that works? So they want editorial discretion. Let's talk about this qualifier. So what he was saying is that they are singling out these companies simply based on their size. And what I referenced earlier was the $100 million in annual revenue, or at least 100 million monthly individual participants. Why would that be important? That is important because small social media companies cannot be opened up to massive fines when they have 2,000 active users and they are still working on their algorithms. They are working on their code. They are trying to build a platform that is superior to what is currently sitting atop the marketplace. And we want them to have the ability to break through the barrier. Should they pass through that buyout bubble, which is what I call it, and actually position themselves to take over what YouTube and Google and Instagram and Facebook currently have. And most people, they don't make it past the buyout bubble. So there's superior technology. I have zero doubt. There are superior platforms out there that got to the buyout bubble and they sold out. They got their 500 million, they got their billion, they got their 750 million, they got their 40 million, whatever it was, they sold out, and all that superior technology gets shelved, right? This is how it works when you're as big as these large companies. You just buy out your competitors, and a young kid who's making $25 an hour or $10 an hour or whatever he's making, and or she, and they get an opportunity for $50 million, they're going to take it, right? We need some people that are principled to develop that technology, and maybe one or two can pass through that buyout bubble and replace these large companies that are currently directing public discourse, that are acting as editorial websites, even though they are public forums and all of that stuff. So you can't hold those small people to the same level. But once you are at that level, you have the infrastructure to make sure you are running your business properly and you are in keeping with all the things that Section 230 has allowed, which means you don't editorialize anything. You just allow people to post, and the only thing that you're shutting down are calls to violence, mobilization of people, and anything that is that's violated by the law. That's how it should work, but that is most definitely not how it works. So let's keep listening here.
It regulates the content and display of particular websites, and it tries to prevent my clients from censoring speakers and content.
Yes.
If you are telling the websites that that they can't censor speakers, you can't turn around and say you're not regulating expressive activity. It's all over this law. And that brings it squarely within the teaching of Tornillo, PG&E, and Hurley. All three of those cases teach that you cannot have the forced dissemination of third-party speech, and they reject considerations of market power, misattribution, or space constraints.
Forced dissemination of third-party information. You are a public forum. Everything is third-party information dissemination. You are, and the case is Clarence Thomas that we'll hear from in a minute, the case that he makes is that you are nothing but a conduit. You are a conduit for all these, everybody that's on here is a third-party person, and they are pushing their information, and they're saying, well, we shouldn't be forced to allow everybody to speak. We should be allowed to have editorial discretion to limit, in this instance, which they don't say it out loud, but which we know, we should be allowed editorial discretion to limit conservative speech. So that as the main platform that's used by 90% of the people across the globe, we should be given, freedom and liberty to just say, no, these voices can't be heard, but the ones that are politically beneficial to us, we should. This is the messed up part, and it's because, and what makes this so dicey is the fact that this is a public company. They do have, a private company. They do have certain rights, but what do you do when they become the public square?
The court's questions.
Mr. Clement, if the government did what your clients are doing, would that be government speech?
So it might be government speech, but I think it would be unconstitutional government speech, which is to say, when the government, obviously you have government speech cases, but when what the government's doing is exercising editorial discretion to censor some viewers or some speakers and not others, I think that plainly violates the First Amendment. And I think that's...
So, clearly stated, if the government was doing the same thing that these social media companies were doing, it would be a violation of free speech. But because they are a private company, they're saying, well, we should be allowed to do whatever we want to do. To a certain degree, you are correct. However, when you are the public forum, and this is where it gets dicey, where 90% of the people get their information, should you be allowed to have that same editorial discretion? No, in my opinion, no, you should not. And still, you can restrict and do whatever you want, but you don't get the benefits of freedom from liability. It's a difficult. It's honestly this is the first time that we've had a situation like this in our country. And it's fascinating to hear people argue it, but it's also kind of scary that we have to worry about the government regulating private companies on one hand, but our freedom of speech is on the other.
Disseminate the message of a third party. And
I've been fortunate or unfortunate to have been here for most of the development of the internet. And the argument under Section 230 has been that you're merely a conduit, which that was the case back in the 90s and perhaps the early 2000s. Now you're saying that you are engaged in editorial discretion and expressive conduct. Doesn't that seem to undermine your Section 230 arguments?
With respect, Justice Thomas, I mean, obviously you were here for all of it. I wasn't here for all of it. But my understanding is that my clients have consistently taken the position that they are not mere conduits. And Congress, in passing Section 230, looked at some common law cases that basically said, well, if you're just a pure conduit, that means that you're free from liability. But if you start becoming a publisher by keeping some bad content out, then you no longer have that common law liability protection. And
here's the problem. What is bad content? In my opinion, this is kind of the crux of all of it. So they say that we should have the right to keep out bad content. Bad content shifts all the time with the left. Bad content is Christian. It is conservative. It is anybody who's a white Christian conservative. You are obviously the enemy and have no right to a voice inside of this country. It's anybody who questions the V word that I was talking about earlier. That is bad content. If anybody questions the government, questions our supreme authority, which, according to Politico and some other people, if you believe that your rights came from God as opposed to the Congress and the Supreme Court, then you are an extremist. That is a wild, wild position to take, even though that's been our take for over 250 years. All these things start to become bad content and worthy of suppression. But that means that half of the country, or over half of the country, I would venture to say, should be suppressed if they were to step out onto a social media platform and voice their opinions. They should be open to having their voice removed altogether, because bad content shifts constantly. And bad content in their eyes has moved into what would be good content, or has been good content, i.e. pro-American, pro-faith, pro-Second Amendment, pro-First Amendment. All of these things were good. They were a great thing for 2 centuries. And all of a sudden, this is evil, nefarious content. We should be allowed to shut them down, and we should be allowed to editorialize, and we should be completely free from liability, even though we're pushing things and propelling things to the front of the news feed that are defamatory, that are untrue, provably untrue. When you talk about a lot of the mainstream media information, all that stuff we should be allowed to push to the forefront, in particular during an election season, by the way. Shift the public discourse, all this, and be completely free from liability. So this is a really wild argument that's being made, and I wish it was getting more play, but people are more worried about Nikki Haley. And, people are more worried about the presidential race. And the presidential race is important, don't get me wrong. But I say worried about Nikki Haley. It's really us Republicans that are worried about Nikki Haley. Oh, we're glued to the primaries. We're glued, we're worried about polls and primaries and, presidential politics, when the real things that are happening are going on to our left, or something like this case being argued in the Supreme Court, I would say is huge. Donald Trump is going to be the nominee. Let's focus on the presidential run and what Donald Trump is going to do to overcome all these legal challenges. That's in the future. I worried for a while about Nikki Haley when this whole thing got started. I was talking about how I like Vivek Ramaswamy, and I'd like Vivek Ramaswamy. And I've always been a Donald Trump supporter, though, and he's my first and primary choice. But let's start focusing on, yes, how we're going to get Trump past all these legal issues, how he's going to get past these legal issues and get on to the presidency. But let's pay attention to what's going on in the margins, the things that they don't want us to see. Now, one thing that has gotten enough play, or has gotten a lot of play, that we all should notice is a journalist. He's a journalist for The Blaze, is actually who he works for. And his name is Steve Baker. And over his January 6th reporting, he was arrested by the FBI. The tricky thing about Mr. Baker's situation is that for years, it's literally been 2 years, he did not know what his charges were. So they would not tell him. The FBI wouldn't tell him. And in his words, he said that when asked, why will you not tell me what I'm being charged with? They said, because you will tweet it out. Because you'll tweet it out. because we know that these are just misdemeanors. We know that if they were to have said then what we know now, which is knowingly entering or remaining in any restricted building or grounds without lawful authority, disorderly and disruptive conduct in a restricted building or grounds, disorderly conduct in a Capitol building, and parading, demonstrating, or picketing in a Capitol building. That is amazing that you can be shackled and paraded in front of a judge, arrested and put in jail for those 4 misdemeanors. And could you imagine if there was another instance where parading, demonstrating, or picketing in the Capitol building took place and someone wasn't arrested? Need we look any further than the pro-Palestinian people who occupied the rotunda for a very long time? Disorderly conduct in a Capitol building? Lest we look any further than the pro-Palestinian protesters in the rotunda? Disorderly and disruptive conduct in a restricted building or grounds? Lest we look any further than the pro-Palestinian people in the rotunda? And on and on and on. These laws are enforceable only if you are a conservative. And even though the FBI does not get involved in misdemeanors, we're going to do it to send a message. This is a message to everybody. You step out of line, the FBI gets involved, we will contort, twist, and bastardize the law in order to meet our own ends and to scare off anybody else who might dare think about speaking out, acting out. Don't you dare step out of line. That's the message that's being sent to the American people. So how did we get here? How did we get to the point of political prosecution, political persecution, all of that? It's quite simple. This is a messaging dilemma. It's messaging from the Democrat Party. It's messaging from the left. And all they had to do was vilify everything that makes us a Christian conservative. We believe in God. We believe in a Second Amendment. We believe in the First Amendment. We love our country. We believe in the founding principles of our nation. We believe in the Constitution. We believe that this is a document based on Judeo-Christian principles. All you have to do is vilify that, and then we become the deplorables that Hillary Clinton told us about, and we become worthy of prosecution and persecution, even if it means violating our current statutes, even if it means going above and beyond for showboat prosecutions like they did with Steve Baker. It's simple. Make us the devil, make us evil, make us anti-democracy or a threat to democracy. And look no further than Morning Joe, good old Mika. Listen to this.
White rural voters a threat to democracy at this point. You would think, as we pointed out, looking at Joe Biden's background and Donald Trump's, that the opposite would be true.
I mean, we lay out the fourfold interconnected threat that white rural voters pose to the country. First of all, and we show 30 polls and national studies to demonstrate this. So we provide the receipts in Chapter 6. They're the most racist, xenophobic, anti-immigrant, and anti-gay geodemographic group in the country. Second, they're the most conspiracist group. QAnon support and subscribers, election denialism, COVID denialism and scientific skepticism, Obama birtherism. Third, anti-democratic sentiments. They don't believe in an independent press, free speech. They're most likely to say the president should be able to act unilaterally without any checks from Congress or the courts or the bureaucracy. They're also the most strongly white nationalist and white Christian nationalists. And fourth, they are most likely to excuse or justify violence as an acceptable alternative to peaceful public discourse.
So because we believe in God, because we believe in the Constitution, because we have a healthy skepticism of government, because we believe in a First Amendment, because we believe in a Second Amendment, all those things. Oh, and by the way, because we believe that the Second Amendment is there to not hunt, not to kill food, but to prevent to quell a tyrannical government, that makes us a threat to democracy. All you have to do is say that we aren't keeping with. See, the left is trying to convince us that their beliefs are in keeping with the Constitution when they are in fact antithetical to the Constitution. And all you have to do is vilify the people who believe in the founding principles of it and who cling to it as the document that grants us all of our liberties and freedoms. Much like the Politico journalist, or Politico analyst, or whatever her position was, which I can't find the video anymore. I'm assuming it was taken down, who said that we're talking about Christian nationalists. These aren't just Christians. No, it's very different. Christian nationalists believe that their rights came from God, not from the Supreme Court and Congress. which is what they believe. That makes us a threat because we believe we are born with our rights, granted to us by our Creator. Because we believe that, we are a threat to democracy. Let's take another peek at another Morning Joe segment that they've done with the good old Rob Reiner, because that guy's a very loving soul. Let's listen to this one.
Being a Christian is about the values of inclusion. Christian nationalism is certainly not based on the values of the gospel.
God wants America to be saved.
They're told over and over and over again that you're in danger.
You need to fight if you don't want to lose your country.
We are in a civil war between good and evil.
This is not a movement about Christian values. This is about Christian power.
What happens to the people who don't believe this stuff?
We are on the precipice.
God is on our side!
We're taking our nation back.
The thing that keeps me up at night is that we lose democracy.
Does that seem possible?
Yes.
That was just part of the trailer for the new documentary entitled God and Country, which looks at the history of Christian nationalism in America and how Donald Trump and members of the far-right media have twisted Christianity to fit their own political and financial agendas. Joining us now, one of the film's producers, Emmy Award-winning actor and renowned filmmaker Rob Reiner, and two-time Emmy Award winner director Dan Partland. This looks powerful and frightening.
Rob, we were talking about before we came on about. I grew up in the Southern Baptist Church, grew up evangelicals. When
was the last time you went to church, Joe?
Certainly a reaction to what happened in the 60s and the 70s. Then there was sort of this return to normalcy in the church, but another group broke off. And I love the title, God and Country, because what we used to always talk about is
I'm going to
God
stop it here in a minute, but
and country.
Right.
It's like we are faithful to our God.
Right.
And we are proud to be Americans.
Right. And the founding fathers.
But it didn't blur together.
No,
it wasn't God and country.
Did.
And now Christian nationalism is not about Jesus.
No.
It's not about the New Testament. It's about pushing a political agenda.
Right. And if you look at the founding fathers and our founding documents, there's a clear separation of church and state. But when you talk to these people, these Christian nationalists who are on a drive to do anything, my way or the highway, they'll resort to violence. They will tell you face to face that there is no separation of church and state in the Constitution.
And there isn't. There is no separation of church and state in the Constitution. But am I going to get my religious advice, how I look at politics and how I look at religion, from Rob Reiner? Go to Rob Reiner's X account. I didn't pull up any of his tweets. It is filled with the most hateful, vile vitriol that you've ever seen. I would put it up against nearly any. I would put it up against Keith Olbermann's Twitter account, as far as a violent not violent leftist, but a vile leftist. So am I going to get my faith advice from Rob Reiner? I pray for Rob Reiner's soul. I hope that I don't know. I'm not going to delve into that. But what I will say is that this idea of Christian nationalism, I don't believe that America should be a theocracy. I don't believe that, which is what true Christian nationalism would be. You essentially do away with the Bill of Rights, you do away with the Constitution, and you have essentially a Christian theocracy in this country. I don't believe in that because the Bible is a book that recognizes free will. The Bible is not authoritarian. Christianity is not authoritarian. People have used it in an authoritarian method before, but that's not what it is meant to be. You can't force someone to convert. Free will is a key component of Christianity. It's a key component of my faith, and it is why this document works so well in conjunction with Christianity, because our Constitution grants us free will. It grants us certain freedoms that are given to us at birth, and we can live our lives the way we want to live our lives. The Bible is much the same. Not that if we are following the Bible, we can live our lives the way we want to live, but you have the option not to follow the Bible. God gives it to us and says, this is how you should live your life. And I will use an example of Frank Turek. And Frank Turek Turik, if you want to look him up, does an amazing job with apologetics, but he was talking to a college student. That college student said, if I live my life properly, if I am kind to people, I'm generous with my money, I don't do anything bad, I'm not cheating on people, I'm not doing any of that stuff, and I live a really, really good life, will I still go to heaven? And his response was no. No, because you have to accept Christ as your Lord and Savior. That is part of it. But God loves it. The way the brilliant part of it was, he said, God loves you too much to force you to spend eternity with him. God loves us. God loves Christians. God loves non-Christians. But God is giving us the option to follow the teachings of the Bible, to live our lives in accordance with the Bible. Knowing that we will fail, which was the purpose for Christ to begin with, is the fact that we can't live up to all of those things, but we use those principles to guide our lives. And the message behind that is actually a unifying message, because the teachings of the Bible are about love, about peace, acceptance, and all of these things. And it's not acceptance of anything and everything, as some churches have done, but it is about accepting people for, who they are, what they are. You have to overcome certain burdens if you're transgender, or if it's homosexuality or whatever it is. Those are just burdens that you have to overcome, and we don't succumb to those, no different than having any other issue. But we are supposed to show love and graciousness to other people. The message itself is so unifying that the left they have to vilify it. They have to divide us. Even inside of the church, they have to divide us. They have to have churches talking about CRT. They have to have churches talking about, transgenderism in the pulpit. These are worldly things invading our faith, and that has caused bifurcations in different denominations. You can use the Methodist Church as an example around homosexual marriage. The Methodist Church said that's not in keeping with what we do. Well, it's not the Methodist Church. Some people in the Methodist Church said that, and so the Methodist Church said, no, we are absolutely doing this, and so the church split. Because there were people who were willing to stand with their convictions and what they believed, and believed that they had a duty and an obligation as people preaching the gospel to stay with the morals that we find in the Bible. And we had the Methodist Church, which did the opposite and said, we are going to go with the world rather than with the Bible. That doesn't mean that we hate homosexual people. We love homosexual people. You're more than, that's a burden that a lot of people have to bear. And this is I'm approaching this now from a faith standpoint. From a constitutional standpoint, I don't care. As a country, we have to have free will for people to live their lives as they see fit. But the church is bifurcated, and there is an awakening that is happening in a large portion of the church. A lot of these churches are growing. Some of them are growing for the wrong reasons, because I'm not going to get into the prosperity gospels and all these things that are more like going to, on Sunday, going to hear a motivational speaker rather than hearing the actual Bible and the scriptures. But there is a growth inside of the church, and so there is a body that can be united, and they have to divide it. I was listening to another guy, he's an apologetics and gentleman, and he was talking to some other college students, and he was asked, well, you're pitching Christianity. Look at all the people that Christianity has killed. Atheism has never killed anyone. And the guy says, excuse me? No one? How many people did Mao kill? How many people did Stalin kill? Socialism and communism have to be done in the vacuum of atheism. There can be no higher power than the government. None. And if you believe your rights come from God, if you believe your rights were given to you at birth and not granted to you by your federal government, then you are a danger to that consolidation of power. You are a danger to the socialist and communist movement. So Christians are next on the chopping block. Christian conservatives are next on the chopping block, because we have, there's two roadblocks to authoritarianism. There's two roadblocks for communism. One is our Constitution, and more importantly is a belief that our rights and our freedoms come from God, not from man. If the federal government can give you rights, the federal government can take them away. If God gives you rights, no man can take them away. And that is why they are coming after the church. That is why they are coming after Christians. That's why they are coming after rural people who believe in God, who believe in the Constitution, who believe in the Second Amendment, who have communities, who are tight-knit groups outside of the cities where they believe they are cultured and they are better and they are more sophisticated. These stupid rural people who believe in rights given to them at birth by God and the right to protect themselves, they are now a danger to the overthrow of the U.S. federal government. There you go. That's my thoughts for today. I love y'all. I was going to get a little bit deeper, into some of the Bible verses. In fact, let me go. Before I do that, I want to talk about very quickly faith in politics. Faith in politics is a very dicey subject, and I went through. You go to Braver Than the Rest. It's a podcast that I did this past week. I've been doing it with him for a couple of months, and I'm the kind of the political guy on there, and we talk about faith, we talk about politics, and one of the things that we discussed was faith in politics. That's all we talked about in the last episode. But we as Christians are called to be part of the political process. No, not called. I won't say that. I'm going to give you an example here. Let me give you a quick example. This is in 1 Peter 2:13-17. Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme, or to the governors as sent to him, to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom to cover up for evil, or as a cover up for evil, but living as servants of God. Honor everyone, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the emperor. Essentially, what you can pull out of this particular verse is that institutions of man are always going to be around us, and we as Christians have to exist inside of those. We can be involved or we can't be involved, but we are supposed to pray for our leaders. We should pray for Congress. We should pray for the Supreme Court. We should pray for the president. All of these people, we should pray for them and hope that God moves in them in a certain way. But at the same time, the evils of this world are very, very real. And we have a place, as I'd said before, that is very fertile for evil to take root, and that is Washington, D.C. There are good people in Washington, D.C. There are great people in Washington, D.C. But there are some nefarious people who are empowered by greed, by envy, by money, by influence, by all of these things that are carnal desires of this world, and they have infected these people. And these are the ones pulling the levers of power. And when evil infects something to that level, to that degree, we as Christians have to be on the lookout for it. We have to be involved in the political process. At the time when in 1 Peter, when this was going on, you had emperors and you had a very different system than what we have now. We have a constitutional representative republic, which is a system that has granted us more freedoms than any other nation in history. This is unprecedented territory where we are right now. The people are supposed to have the power. We have to live, as it's saying, we have to live according to God's will. We have to do good. We have to do good things. We should have a system. The system of man should be to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. This is simply a verse showing the way that a government should operate, or that a higher authority should operate. But what do we do when that higher authority is almost entirely infected by evil intent? When it's highly infected by the desires of this world through envy, greed, lust, all of these things. And what do we do when we get to a point where that higher authority is willing to subjugate its people, is willing to push down and crush its people for its own selfish ends? Well, we have to speak out. We are servants of God. We are. We want what is best for everybody in this country. We have found no other system, and there is no other system better than this Constitution. There is no better set of values for us to follow than the Judeo-Christian values that we have followed up until a certain point. We can debate on when that started to shift. We have to love the other people in this country. We have to fear God. And even though our institution is not necessarily going to go away, but we have to be involved. It is okay for us to be involved. And when you have a certain political party that not only opposes those morals that we hold dear, those things, those Judeo-Christian principles that have guided this country for a long time, but are actively going after the people, i.e. Christians and conservatives, then we have to speak up. We have to be on guard. We have to be aware, and we have to be vigilant in this process, and we have to vote a certain way. We're in new territory, but it's okay. I have faith in God. I have faith in the American people. I have faith in our Constitution, and I think there's a possibility things will be okay. And if not, I don't know. Maybe the Lord will come back. Anyway, thank y'all so much for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, leave comments below. We're on X Locals, Rumble, and YouTube, and we'll see you in the next video.